Well, what's up everyone? We're going to talk today about power creep in TCGs, both Flesh and Blood, Magic, and Yu-Gi-Oh! Let's see how we do it. Well, what's going on everyone? Welcome back to Kitchen Table TCG. We're here with the whole TCG setup because we're going to talk about power creep in TCGs in general. We're going to talk about a few ideas of how to fix some power creep and a few different use cases and scenarios. This is not going to be a negative video. We're going to talk positively about some ways that we can change some things and some things that I think are just doing great. So first off, let's set the tone for you. Let's set the idea for you. Obviously, power creep is the idea that cards get better as the game goes on. We're going to talk about some reasons that power creep is actually good, and then we're going to talk about the reasons that power creep is generally seen as bad. But I wanted to start off and just kind of paint the picture for you of what is going on in the current world. So in Flesh and Blood right now, Briar has won 12 of the 20 Nationals events, and I don't think that that's a major issue. It's definitely a question mark. It's definitely something I think the community needs to look at, but more realistically, it's probably just that nobody really expected Briar at these national events, and nobody really could work on like a Lexi deck to fix it. But then also, I think it's just super early in the Flesh and Blood life cycle. We haven't seen Everfest happen yet. I think Everfest could provide a lot of solutions for Briar that maybe we haven't seen yet. So I'm not that concerned about that. But the bigger issues, I think, are when people start talking about Command and Conquer and about just reprinting another type of Command and Conquer. I hear that all the time from people. I don't think that LSS would actually do that, but that's something I hear a lot from the community of, hey, Command and Conquer is just really expensive. Well, you can't reprint it because of the money, so why don't we just reprint it in another form, and then you have two Command and Conquers essentially. Anyway, there's just a lot of bigger issues there. So we're going to talk about that a little bit. And then in Magic the Gathering, you've got like this 3-color standard that always happens. You've got like the dual and triple lands that even under not tapped. There's just like a lot. Like if you look at Magic from the past and Magic today, the game is completely different. There's a great video by the Magic historian where he compares Sarah Angel, which is a 5-cost white angel, to Baneslayer Angel, which is a 5-cost white angel, and just the power difference between the two is just massive. So lots of conversation there. And then Magic and Yu-Gi-Oh! I don't know so much about Yu-Gi-Oh! But there's a lot of power creep in the way things can be targeted and the destruction of different creatures or whatever they're called, and then bouncing them back to the hand. Like basically there's just been this whole cycle over the last 5 to 10 years where first it was like, oh, you can just destroy that creature, but then they put indestructible on it, and then okay, we'll just bounce it back to the hand, and they put like a hexproof to it. There's just been a lot of like powerful stuff that's kind of ruined the formats and things like that. So Yu-Gi-Oh! Is not going to be the focus of this at all. I was just kind of talking about lots of things. So let's talk about why power creep is good and why it happens, because it's not an accident. Like power creep is not just some accident that the community should be responding to and being like, why, Wizards, why would you print this big, special thing, or why make Briar a good hero? Like power creep is intentional. Maybe calling it power creep is not really fair, but power creep is intentional because what it does is a few things. Number one, it sells boxes. And so in other words, if you have a set that's just really terrible and there's no good cards in it, why would you as a consumer for the trading card game buy the product? Well, you want it because there's nothing good in it. So like number one for power creep, the reason that they put powerful cards in new sets, the reason I'm guessing that there's cards that were developed for Everfest for Flesh and Blood. There's cards that were developed for Tales of Aria for Flesh and Blood that they were like, whoa, wait, let's just put that in Everfest. Like I bet you that is something that happened because they wanted to help sell the next box as well, which is totally good because that works really well for LGSs. Like LGSs need to be able to sell boxes, and that goes into the second point, which is like, you need to be excited about the product. I need to be excited about the product. I need something to talk about the product. So I think like as we get into that kind of idea that powerful cards and new sets is really good. You want things to shake up the meta. You want things to change the meta. You want things to be different and change around, especially in these card games that are I would call them more like legacy card games or non-rotating formats, like Flesh and Blood and Yu-Gi-Oh! Are both non-rotating formats. So you do need something that mixes it up, but the balancing act there, the thing that needs to be balanced is you don't want to kind of ostracize all the other heroes or get rid of all the, you don't want to print a better Command and Conquer or a card that makes Command and Conquer useless. You got to kind of find that balance. Anyway, we'll get into the negative next. Power creep, it sells boxes, it excites players, and lastly, it keeps cards accessible. So, you know, flash forward in a couple years, you've got these cards that have only been printed in the earlier sets, and they're really good and they're expensive. Well, if you add new cards or new heroes or talent system or subclasses and that kind of thing, it allows the new players to get involved in this game, especially in these non-rotating games like Flesh and Blood again. It allows those new players to get involved in the game in a new set. They don't have to buy really expensive older cards because the level of power for the new sets is at least equal to the old set. So that's super important. Anyway, let's talk about the negatives, why power creep is bad. Number one, old players have to then keep up. And this is like a balancing act too, because the old players always want to buy new things and whatever, but if you have we'll just use Flesh and Blood. If you have a Dorinthia deck that you love, that you've invested, you've foiled the whole thing out, you don't want to have to constantly be changing every card in that deck. And I don't think that Flesh and Blood is there. I don't think that that's what Flesh and Blood does. I think a better, for me, like Commander. Like I played my first game of Commander in probably 8 months the other day. I haven't picked up a single Magic the Gathering card in the last 8 months. I sat down and played, and all of my play group was playing with same decks, but all had different cards. I didn't know hardly any of the cards in it because they have printed so many cards that were so much better that in order to keep your decks tuned and better, you had to add new cards. You had to completely change your deck. I'm not about that. Like, I'm not going to go out and change my landfall deck. Like, my Lord Windgrace landfall deck, I might add 1 or 2 cards, but I'm not taking 20 cards out every set. I hate that. Like, that drives me nuts. And it's one of the main reasons that I wasn't super excited about Magic the Gathering about a year ago. And then, you know, power creep is bad because it breaks formats. Like, if you look at Magic the Gathering Standard, man, it's just like a new set comes out and it just kind of breaks the whole thing. It breaks formats instead of adding to formats. And I think that's a really hard balance that requires a ton of playtesting. Because what you want with a new set, what you want with new cards, is that they add to the meta, that they slightly alter the meta, not that they completely, radically blow up and change the meta into a point where like the meta doesn't exist and everyone's just guessing. And you could make an argument that this is what happened with Briar. I think the whole thing with Briar is just a little bit different in that the game is so young, and also you have Everfest coming out. Maybe the timing of the set release with all the Nationals events was weird, but I don't know. That's just not. I think there's a different line there that we're not really crossed yet. So here's some solutions. Here's some things I want to say that I think are future based. As you're wondering, I hear this all the time. I get messages all the time saying, "Hey, how are we going to do the whole legacy format, and especially in Flesh and Blood? Like, what are we going to? How is this going to work? You've got the Living Legend status and all that stuff. How does this work?" And I don't know the answers to that. I don't know what LSS has up their sleeve. I tend to trust them. I tend to believe them. Here are some things for Flesh and Blood that I really hope that we see, and that is creative design. In other words, taking something like the Spring Tunic and replacing it in Flesh and Blood, I think is perfect. You could replace it with like a Winter Tunic, right? That is a generic, I think that's super important, like a generic card that you have a different form, in the Winter Tunic where it does the same effect, which is like every turn you put something on it, and then on turn 3 you can take something off of it and get get some sort of bonuses. Like, I think that is a way to kind of give, it's not power creep, it's kind of like create creativity creep, right? Where like you're exciting the new player base because you've got this new card that does do something different, but the level of power of it is not out of this world. It's just kind of like slowly increased, right? So maybe I think there was actually one Reiner's Spring Tunic that was in my my hashtag FAB Everfest creative card competition, where you took it off and you got I think it was 2 health or something like that. So there's just different ways that you can do it that would give some excitement to the community, create a collectible item as well, but also not, I would call it creativity creep. You know, this is the issue. You know, I don't like a better Command and Conquer. Like, printing a better Command and Conquer would just, and I hate that suggestion, it would just produce the idea that you need 6 cards in your deck, 3 Command and Conquers and 3 better Command and Conquers, rather than just the 3 Command and Conquers. And the idea behind that is like you don't want to devalue the CNC. I don't know, that's kind of ridiculous. But just coming up with more creativity, like different hit effects for a 6 cost that, you know, that it applies better to one specific deck or one archetype of the deck. And the talent system kind of does that. For me, like, I think in order to excite the old guard, in order to excite the old players, you do need some generics or some class specific generics, meaning like, you know, a equipment piece that is just for Guardian instead of like a elemental guard, that kind of thing. Like, I think you got to find some ways to excite the old crowd while you are bringing new and accessible cards to the newer crowd, if that makes sense. Anyway, creative design, a creative element where you're utilizing things that we all love and you're just being creative with them to not make them like a creative creep. Anyway, and then for Magic the Gathering, and this might apply to Flesh and Blood too, actually, but format specific boxes. And I don't know what the future for Flesh and Blood is. Like, I don't know if we only have, you know, Classic Constructed and Blitz and Ultimate Pit Fight. You know, Ultimate Pit Fight seems to be like a secondary thing for LSS that they don't really focus on. Even Blitz doesn't really seem to be like the, you know, they don't seem to design cards for Blitz. They seem to design them just, you know, for Classic Constructed and Draft. Recently mostly for Draft, but I think for Magic the Gathering, I would love to see these, like, you know, like collector boosters, right? Have cards in collector boosters that only apply to, call them commander boosters, right? So that you have a set, and instead of putting, like, what I hate is they put commander specific cards in their draft boxes that kind of end up breaking the standard format. So, and this is probably not realistic because then you have all these different, but they already have all these different products, right? Like, you already buy draft boosters or set boosters, or, you know, so you would just be buying specific to the set that you like, and then they change the cards. I don't know, might be a terrible idea, probably is a terrible idea, but something specific like that where you have format specific boxes. In other words, you're printing cards for Commander that are not utilized. I guess they kind of do that with like the Commander decks, that those cards aren't used in Standard, but like you actually create the set. Hey, this set is Modern Horizons Commander Edition. This is Modern Horizons Draft Edition. This is Modern Horizons Standard Edition. And you kind of can only use specific cards in specific sets. That might be a way to do it, especially as they're going online and that kind of thing. Anyway, just some ideas on power creep. I think it makes it really difficult when you have multiple formats like that you're designing cards for. All of a sudden, a card that was designed for Commander breaks the standard format, and that wasn't the intent of it. And I think you see that kind of across the board. So let me know what you think about power creep. I know that this is not my greatest understanding and my greatest strength as a content creator. I do think that there's a lot of other things to talk about, so I would love to know what your thoughts are. Anyway, remember to be kind to the people around you, and we'll see you again next video.